I would like to present is the light of the Supreme that illumines us with the truth. And that is what Savitri has been and is for me. Light of the Supreme that comes sometimes in reading, sometimes in hearing, sometimes just in thinking or meditating on Savitri. But ultimately, the only part that really is of value is when there is this light of the Supreme that comes across. I do enjoy everything else. I enjoy the intellectual meaning. I enjoy when something goes in the heart and there's a response from the heart. But what is really most enjoyable is when one feels the light coming down, which is in Savitri, which comes through Savitri. Inspired a little bit by Toby's story, I also feel like sharing with you how and when I started reading Savitri. It was in 1968. I was 16 and a half years old. I was still studying in Mathura in UP. Although most people think that I have grown up here right from my early childhood, it is also the way I feel and think. But in physical time, it was 16 and a half years old. Having grown up in a family where father was visiting the ashram, and we knew about Mother and Sri Aurobindo, but I hadn't visited. We had as children's books on Mother and Sri Aurobindo that we had read. I have heard later on, but I am not 100% sure at this point, and it doesn't really matter, that it seems there was an attempt or an application made for me to join the school here when I was maybe 11 or 12 years old, and I was accepted, it seems, but my mother at that point felt I was too young to go alone and come away from the family. But this is what I have heard. I do not know. I have not asked my mother. She's not there anymore now. But at 16 and a half, when I had finished my 12th standard, my father asked, would you like to go and visit ashram now? And in the hindsight, I know that all of our brothers and sisters, when they came to, say, high school or intermediate, my father was very keen that they go into higher education into a better place than just the local college, one choice only. So they were all going to universities, in some to Banaras University. My one sister went to Vanasthali Institute in Rajasthan. So here I was, and I think my father knew that probably this is my place, or it could be my place, to continue studies in Pondicherry at the ashram school. So without telling all this, he just said, would you like to visit ashram? And I was happy. But it's still, an Indian 16 and a half year old is not quite an adult. It is still a child. And I traveled all the way from Mathura to Pondicherry by myself. First time such a long trip. And I think at that time the trains were taking at least 1.5 times the time that they take now. It was twice long the journey. So it was good, almost 3 days in the train. His good friend Chandradeep ji was the Hindi editor of Purodha magazine and other translations of Sri Aurobindo's books, living in Pondicherry. So he was my contact person. I can't remember now how I managed in Chennai to come out of the train and take a bus and arrive in Pondicherry. I don't remember those details, but things worked out. I knew not a word of Tamil at that time, and in those years, not a word of Hindi was spoken in Chennai. It was completely. So, landed in Pondicherry, and I had a Hindi magazine that was published from Ashram in my hand for him to recognize me. And at the bus station, he knew me, and we met together. I was brought to his home. I stayed with him, and it was a 1 week where each day was like an eternity in an undescribable bliss. Those days in the ashram, there was such a sense of being in, just like you have come to the most illumined place. Everything felt right. Everything felt in its place. Everything was as good as it can be in this universe. That was the feeling. Of course, Mother was there in those days, and it was a very different atmosphere in Pondicherry, in the ashram and around the ashram. After about maybe a week, and I had roughly 2 weeks stay at that time. After about a week, I inquired, do people go and see Mother? Can I see Mother now? And it was not any darshan time. It came in the middle of June here, just after the exams there. So that was the summer holidays. And I was told only on their birthdays people can see the Mother. So I said, okay, I will not be able to, because my birthday is not in June. A day or two passed, but it was like such long days, and my mind could not come off from that state of prayer, state of aspiration, of wanting to meet the Mother. So ultimately I couldn't hold back. I just simply wrote, very simple. And at that time my English also, I think, was very basic. Although we had learned English right along, but it was not a spoken language for us at that time. But I managed to write to her that I'm here now, although my heart and I feel my soul is at her feet. Could my body also come and touch her feet or something like that? And I think a day later, I got the answer back from Talinida with a time given. And 2 days later, I went to see the Mother. And everybody was so surprised. Oh, you have been called to see the Mother. So here I was, went up and waited. I don't know if you would have gone in the early years, that room that is left to where Sri Aurobindo's room we go to, where we go up to Mother's room when we climb up that thing. So downstairs in that room, we would be sitting there, and from the top of the stair, the opening, Champaklal would come and call one by one the people upstairs. I went upstairs, entered the room, saw her at a distance. Entering the room, it was to the left side there. But then it's like the physical world slowly disappeared completely. And there was no me, no nothing, no my body. It was just like things were undescribable, unthinkable, without form, without any other sensation than I am in her. I was not in front of her, it was like I am in her. And all I could remember afterward, that I went and sat in front of her. And I looked at her. I think at some point I touched her feet with my head, and also she touched my head with her hand. But it was like not time. It was beyond time, and one doesn't know how long. And it was like there was nothing else in the universe at that time. Nothing else existed. And these are not now mental reflections. At that time, I didn't even think of anything else. It was like nothing else really was there. Later on, I somehow came down, spent some time in the Samadhi, came home to Chandradeepji's place, and it was like my feet were not touching the ground anywhere. I hardly saw anything else, except I could still walk through the path and come home. And later in the day, somebody else living in the same place came and asked me, so you saw the mother, and what was she wearing? And at that point I realized that I had nothing else in my physical memory than her eyes. Nothing else. But her eyes also were not eyes like in that dimension. It was eyes that was I was entering through the eyes, and that is it. There was nothing else. There was no form, there was no clothing, colors, anything. So that was kind of entering into the light of the Supreme. That was my first experience. And naturally, within the same time, I had met Kirit Bhai, filled out an application for the school, left everything. But they say the session there only starts in December. And the answer whether I am admitted to the school or not would only be known a few months later. So I left with the return ticket that I had and went to the Banaras University, where I had already admission for following the studies. But I think mid-October or November, I got the news that I had been accepted. So left that, came over here and started. And that was December 1968. Joined the school. On the day 1 or day 2 itself, and because of my previous studies and all that, they had put me straight in the higher course. So with Jugalda, as you must have known him, and Jugalda on, I don't know whether it was day 1 or week 1 or within the very short time, and higher course at that time, everybody had to choose what they wanted to study, with whom they wanted to study, and how they wanted to study. That was the system at that time. I was completely new here, and without my asking anything, Jugalda reserved every day first period in me for reading Sri Aurobindo. He just knew that was needed. So every day, first period, I would go, and that time this knowledge building was not there. We had our higher course in the library, and Jugalda's one seat was there in front of the main veranda, and I would go and wait for him. He would often go to the school and do a few things, so he would not be there at 7:45, sometimes 8 o'clock, sometimes few minutes after 8 o'clock, and up to 8:30, 8:35, that would be our first period with Jugalda. And every single day we read, and I don't remember the exact rhythm, but we were reading both the Life Divine and Savitri. So that's where Savitri began, and that's how I've given a little long narration, but I think it was worthwhile. to bring to this point of how I started reading Savitri. And with Jugalda, with my very basic English at that point, he did not insist that I would know perfectly the grammar or all the dictionary meaning of all the words and all that. Basically, with him, he would take a passage, we would read maybe sometimes 3 lines, sometimes 5 lines, sometimes 10 lines, and he would give me just a general direction, what it is. And naturally, we started from the book 1, canto 1. So it's also not a very physical, descriptive thing. It is in a very open dimension. And he would give his suggestions, but it was not his attempt to make me sort of intellectually understand. It was to just pour as much as would go in and sink in. And then gradually more and more I read, more I started enjoying. And sometimes I would go back and read those passages. And in those times, I started experiencing more and more just the reading, as if the sound of Savitri, the way I was reading, is pouring something inside. It's opening something inside. It was not always the mind making a perfect picture. Didn't mean that I was always blank. So often there were many pictures of the mind, beautiful pictures, especially because I also love painting and all that. So all those dawn colors and the way things are happening, and the first canto, so many images are there. So those images also will come. But there was something beyond images, something beyond the literal meaning, which I can't put words into. But I think one section here probably describes those readings which we had done, I think just a few months ago. As when the mantra sings in yoga's ear, its message enters, stirring the blind brain. So this is what it was. It was the mantra sinking. My mind was often like a blind. It was not an inquisitive, trying to understand everything kind of mind. It was very open, supple kind of attitude. And I think I had even read those passages from Mother's comments on Savitri, that just let it sink. You don't have to all the time attempt to make a rational meaning or anything like that. So this passage really, I find it so wonderful the way it sinks. Shall I read the whole thing just for us to enjoy together? This is the yoga passage. It's 9857. As when the mantra sings in yoga's ear, its message enters, stirring the blind brain, and keeps in the dim, ignorant cells its sound. The hearer understands a form of words, and musing on the index thought it holds, he strives to read it with the laboring mind, but finds bright hints, not the embodied truth. Then, falling silent in himself to know, he meets the deeper listening of his soul. The word repeats itself in rhythmic strains. Thought, vision, feeling, sense, the body itself are seized and unalterably, and he endures an ecstasy and an immortal change. He feels a wideness and becomes a power. All knowledge rushes on him like a sea, transmuted by the white spiritual ray. He walks in naked heavens of joy and calm, sees the God face and hears transcendent speech. An equal greatness in her life was sown. So this for me is a passage that describes, in a way, Savitri's reading and Savitri's message sinks through many layers of us and goes deeper and deeper. And it's so beautifully described.